Tethered Nation, you guys have heard me talk about the saddle setup, Tethered Saddle Setup, their Predator platform, for quite some time. This is the second full season that I've used it. I've killed out of it twice now, and really what it has helped me do, I figured instead of, I've given you guys specs, the weight, and how light it is, bulky free that it is, and so on and so forth, but I thought today I would give you a little bit of a testimonial. As, I will credit, and there's been a lot of people who've had a lot of influence on how I've started to hunt and how I've kind of evolved as a hunter, but I would say there's been no piece of equipment that's been more instrumental in me making that evolution than Tethered's saddle setups. The reason I say that is that, I'm a guy that works like a normal job like everybody else out there. And so when I go on hunting trips or I'm hunting, I have limited time to get stuff done. So I typically want to hunt more aggressively. And that's something I've challenged myself with the past, year and a half, is to just, to be more aggressive and don't lay back. And the saddle setup has really helped me do that because I've spent much more time with boots on the ground scouting than I ever have in years past. And that's really because I'm not carrying a bunch of bulky stuff into the timber with me. And so I don't mind. It's not a hindrance to carry my saddle setup. And that way, when I find fresh sign, I can get into the tree and I don't have to leave and come back and drop scent. If once I see it, I'm in the tree hunting it. I'm not finding it, setting up a stand, taking the time to do that, then leaving and coming back and hunting it the next day. I'm literally getting into the tree and hunting it at that moment. And I can't say that if I was using any other setup other than a saddle setup, specifically Tethered's gear, that I would be making the same strides I'm making now and becoming a more aggressive and a more mobile hunter. So if this is something that you're interested in, if you want to challenge yourself to be more mobile, more aggressive, and go find deer instead of letting the deer find you, then I would suggest that you go to tetherednation.com and check out all their saddle gear. I guarantee you, if you get into it, you won't be disappointed, and you'll probably become an addict like me. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm actually having a little bit of Skull Brew coffee this morning while I record this. If you're not aware of what Skull Brew Coffee Company is, it's a business that my wife and I started. In order to give back more to conservation, we roast premium coffee, and it ships out within hours of roasting, guaranteeing that you will get the freshest coffee available. The kicker is that we donate 10% of our proceeds back to conservation. You choose where the donation goes at checkout. Check us out at skullbrewcoffee.com, and let's do some good together and help protect wild places one cup at a time. Visit skullbrewcoffee.com and pledge your support of conservation today. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you are listening to episode number 157. Today, I'm answering your listener questions with a little help from my buddy, Chad Sylvester. So stay tuned. All right. What is going on, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're feeling good. Hope you're feeling fine. Got another cool podcast on tap for you today. As far as my hunting update for the week, it is nada. This past weekend, the weather was a little bit gross out, and truth be told, I had some work to do over the weekend, and so I wasn't able to get out, which isn't, I kind of view the hunting that I get to do over the course of gun season, because, I'll carry my bow with me during that time of year. I kind of view it as a bonus. And so I did get 2 hunts in during the course of gun season and had to take this past weekend off. But the good news is that I'll have a little bit of time off over the Christmas holiday. I was potentially going to take a trip over that holiday to go hunt with some buddies out of state for a quick 4 or 5 day trip. But the work schedule wasn't going to allow it. I have some meetings and stuff that I need to attend at the end of the week, so I can't get there. I can't travel those days. And then probably thought better and thought that it was probably just a better choice to stay home over the course of that weekend and get a nice long weekend in with my wife and my daughter and have a nice, just kind of cozy, Christmas holiday weekend leading into the holiday itself. And then I will, get out during next weekend to do a little bit of hunting, just here around the house. And that was the other incentive, I guess, for me sticking around. I still have a buck tag here in Pennsylvania to fill, so I thought rather than maybe traveling to a different state, I could probably win some points with the wife by sticking around, and also have a tag to fill here in the state. So not gonna stretch this upfront out too long, just because I want to get right to it. We were doing a Q&A answering session today, and I actually enlisted the help of my buddy Chad Sylvester from Exodus Outdoor Gear to give me a hand. He and I, we talk frequently on the phone. We haven't seen each other in person in a little while. And at the upfront of this, he had a really cool encounter at the beginning of the year. We talk a little bit about that. And then otherwise, he and I just kind of go through the list of questions that you guys sent in. You guys sent in a ton of them, which was awesome, to the point that, Chad and I were able to share, over Skype and over the phone, it's of course, but share a drink together and just kind of go through these. So this session ended up running I want to say almost 3 hours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably break this into 2 podcasts. So the first segment of the podcast will get a little bit of his journey from his season this year so far. And then along with answering a handful of questions, and then the part 2 of this podcast I'll put out, which will all be the remainder of the listener Q&A. Some really great questions. We talk a little bit about, I think in this one specifically, we'll probably cover some of the challenges that we had from this year. The debate of hunting scrapes versus rubs, is another question we'll probably cover in this one. And we do touch on a little bit of saddle hunting, because the cool thing was that, Chad has saddle hunted in the past, several years ago. I want to say probably like 5 years ago. I think he started using an old trophy line of some sort, and he really didn't dig it. And then he, was able to meet up with Greg and Ernie from Tethered, and I was able to convince him to maybe try a saddle. And now that's kind of the way he's hunting for the most part now, which is cool. So we did get some saddle questions, and we talk a little bit about saddle hunting and address some of those questions specifically. But without further ado, we're just going to go ahead and turn this thing over to the Q&A. As always, I appreciate you guys listening. And if I don't get a chance to talk to you beforehand, I hope everyone out there has a happy and safe Merry Christmas, Merry Holiday, Happy New Year, all that good stuff. I hope Santa Claus is good to you. I hope you get some time with some friends and family and just enjoy, hopefully a little bit of rest and relaxation, and get out into the timber if you can. So thanks for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I've got my buddy on. I think I feel like I mention you on just about every podcast that I do. Your name creeps in there in some way, shape, or form. But I'm joined by my brother from another mother, Mr. Chad Sylvester from Exodus Outdoor Gear. How you doing? He's also known affectionately around these parts as Rodeo, if for those of you that don't know. But how's it going, brother?
Doing well, man. Enjoying the afternoon, the evening, I guess now. Got myself a glass of the bird, as we call it over here, and just relaxing, excited to talk and catch up, man. It's been forever since we've actually seen each other.
I know.
But we're always talking on the phone. Yes, and deer hunting, life, personal stuff. So
yeah, exactly.
Doing good, man. How you been?
I'm doing all right, man. It was just we were talking, offline before we started recording. Just work's been crazy busy, man, since I got back from Iowa. It's understandably so. You're gone for 2 weeks, and it's just like you come back and nothing has changed, but everything has changed at the same time. So you're just trying to catch back up, and then it's always, because that trip always happens like right before Thanksgiving. It's like short weeks, and then like you're right into like the push toward the end of the year. Where all your work is due before the end of the year. You got to wrap up financials and client work and stuff like that. So that's the story of my life right now. So I'm really just like holding on by a thread, trying to get through next week to where I get a couple of days off for the holiday. And I've bought literally one Christmas gift this year to this point. So I hope you're further ahead than I am.
Well, I'm actually behind you because I've bought nothing, but I'm very thankful that my wife does basically 99% of the shopping. So we're pretty much we're pretty much done, tapped out, whatever you want to say.
Right.
But it's thank God that my wife is a saint, because I would really be screwed.
Yeah, if it were up to you, man, I think everyone would be getting like a roll of chew in their stocking. Is what I think. Like the kids would all each get a roll of chew.
Between that and bourbon, cowboy boots, something along those lines.
Yeah, that's exactly what it would be. It would be a roll of chew in your stocking, and then it would be bourbon, cowboy boots, and like like I don't know, like some broadheads or something for the kids. Be like, hey, don't use all that at once. You might hurt yourself. But yeah, the wife does the same thing here, man. Like she's got everything on lockdown, for the kiddo and stuff like that. The only gift I bought was hers, and she knew what she was getting. And then she actually bought it herself because she knew where she could save money. So I really didn't buy anything. I was just like, hey, I'm going to get you this. She was like, yeah, cool. I'll go ahead and buy it. I was like, awesome. Done. Don't even need to wrap it. It's literally sitting in the garage. Yeah. So pretty stoked, pretty stoked about that. But, Man, but before we get into today's topic at hand, just so everyone out there that's listening knows what we're going to get into, is I had a bunch of you write in some listener questions to get answered today, which is, I always love this episode. I think you did one of the Q&A episodes with me last year when we were in Harrisburg, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And we had a bunch of people write in, so appreciate, all those folks who wrote in. We'll try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. The ones we don't get to, we'll have a follow-up session at some point and try to get the rest of them. So always super appreciative of you guys helping me out, getting this podcast pulled together, man. But I know you and I have been talking throughout the year, but you've had kind of before we get to the Q&A, you've had a little bit of a roller coaster bow season, man. So why don't you give the folks out there listening the deets on what you've had going on since like October till now?
Yeah, it has been a roller coaster is the best way to describe it. Emotionally, I guess if you want to talk about the emotional side of things, it's been pretty up and down. Going into the season, I told myself I was going to focus on public lands closer to home, so I could actually spend more time in the woods, spend more time scouting versus traveling, 4 or 6 hours away from home to hunt, because it makes it really difficult just to throw an evening hunt or throw a morning hunt before or after work. It makes it damn near impossible.
Yeah.
So, the first couple of weeks of the season in Ohio, we opened just a little bit early. We actually opened up like September 28th here. So the first couple of weeks, we were bouncing around the swamp, just trying to glass deer, find deer. And that led into the third week of October. Mm-hmm. And I got a message from Dan Infalt, one of our good friends, and we were out at his place in the spring, and we had just, we were out there BS and did a content session, and in that talk, or after actually we stopped recording, we started talking about Ohio public land, and I said, man, if you ever want to come out, chase big deer, like I got a place that it's hard to hunt, but like it would fit your mentality, your style to a T.
Right.
So middle of October, he sends me a Facebook message. He's like, hey, the Beast Crew's thinking about heading to Ohio to hunt. And I was like, awesome. Like, I got instantly pumped. I was like, if you guys are coming out, let me know. We can link up. I can, I'll throw you my recommendations. I actually sent him some recommendations. These are the areas that I hunt. Like, if you guys want to come out, let me know. We'll link up.
And I remember when you told me this, because I actually, even though I was going to Iowa, I was like, son of a bitch. I was like, I want to go on that hunt. I knew where you guys were going, and I was like, I want to do that. But
yeah. Well, I'll try to make this. I mean, this is it kind of gets long and drawn out, so I'll try to make it as short as possible. But those guys did not end up coming to Ohio. But prior to, because they had thought they were going to come like that first week of November.
Right.
So this is like October 18th through the 20th, somewhere in there. So we were sitting in the office, Cameron and I, and we decided, hey, like if these guys are going to come, we need to go out, put some cameras up, and get some intel for, let them run for a couple weeks, and then do a little bit of scouting and figure out what's going on. So if we all get down there as a group, we can get a jump start, for that first week of November. So on our way down there, we had, I have a bunch of cameras out down there. It's not a secret. I mean, it's the area that you hunt. You're very, very familiar with that place.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult the cameras are really, I guess, broad and spread out. So it's very difficult to just go down there and start pulling cards. Like you're walking miles in between card pulls. So to go down there and hang and check cameras and scout, you really got to have a plan and be really efficient with your time. Otherwise, you're just not going to get very much done. So on the way down, we had planned to go in this one certain area, and we were basically just going to go in, scout, hang cameras. And directly across from that, there was directly across from where we were going to park to access the piece that we were interested in, there was a camera there that we had checked over the summer in June or July. Mm-hmm. And when we checked that card in June or July, I actually picked up a shed off a 3-year-old deer right in front of the camera. And when we checked the card, we thought that deer was probably like 130-inch deer, 130-inch 10-pointer, probably a 3-year-old. Right. And so that camera had been unchecked since then. And Cameron said, hey, we should go check that camera while we're parked right here. And I was like, no, like we have a handle on what's going on that ridge. I don't think there's any need for us to go over there and check that. We just need to be efficient, get all these other cameras out and scout. And he was like, dude, it's a quarter mile from the truck. Like, let's just go in at dark. I was like, all right, well, we could do that.
Right.
I was like, well, if we're going to go in at dark, we might as well go in and hunt it for an hour and see what happens, So this specific spot it's a bench system just above the bottom 1/3. It's somewhere between the bottom 1/3 and halfway up this ridge, and it's on an oak flat. There's a drainage on one end that goes into kind of a greenbrier patch in a less defined saddle. So there's bedding on both sides basically of this oak flat, and the bedding's probably 400 or 500 yards apart from these two bedding areas.
Right. And isn't there, if I'm remembering the spot right, isn't it like on the back side of that huge clear cut? Is that the right spot?
Yeah, so it's on a western facing slope. And it's probably about a half a mile from that clear cut.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's two clear cuts there. The one I think that where we saw where you and I were hunting that Chrysler buck.
Yeah.
It's on the back. It's on the back side of that clear cut.
Right.
Is the spot.
Yep.
And it's basically there's a primary scrape there, and I say primary. There's that camera's been sitting there for 2+ years watching the scrape, and there's one giant scrape there, several licking branches in this tree, and then there's a couple scrapes in that. I'm talking like in a 30-foot radius. There's probably 4 or 5 other scrapes there,
right? And
there's rubs and whatever leading up to it. So that camera's watching that scrape. So, anyways, we get in there that morning. We get set up. Actually, I'm hanging. We're in saddles, so I'm hanging sticks, and I get all set up, and Cameron's down there buzzing through the photos on this camera in the dark, and I could hear him say, "Oh my God, oh Chad," and I'm like, like what's going on? And I'm like, "There a big deer on there?" He's like, "Yeah, there's some good ones on here." I'm like, "Oh, cool," and that's all I thought of.
Right.
And my expectations, it's a super low deer density area, so the expectations going down there and just throwing like random hunt at something is like a shot in the dark, basically. I mean, that's truly what it is.
Yeah.
So we get set up. I get set up, and I tell him, "Come on up the tree." So he comes up, and he has his camera gear, so it's just cracking gray light. And 20 minutes goes by, and we hear a deer working a scrape down below us on that lower bench, and it's probably that bench is exactly actually 30 yards below us from the tree that we're in. And this is October 24th, so still ton of leaves on the trees. Can't really see much. Anyways, you hear this deer come in, work a scrape, can't see it, and he's down there for like 10 minutes. And then you hear him after he gets done working his scrape. You hear him; he's just down there walking on this bench, probably just grazing on those white oak acorns. And you hear those steps get further away from us. And the whole time we're talking, whispering back and forth, like, can you see this deer? Where is he?
Right.
What is he? We can't see anything. So as this deer starts to get further and further away from us, and now it's probably been 15 minutes, right? And as this deer starts to get further away from us, Cameron says, "Do you have a grunt call?" I said, "No, I don't usually carry a grunt call." And he was like, I'm going to reach over and grab this little sapling and just start, shaking it and breaking the branches and raking it off the tree that we're on it sounds like a deer working the scrape and this scrape's, we're 20 yards off the scrape.
Right.
So I'm gonna do this to sound like a deer working the scrape. So he does that for like 20 seconds, and then instantly, like, I hear these footsteps come back towards us, and I peek around the tree, and all I see is giant dark rack, like absolute monster. And Cameron's to my right, my bow's to my left. That primary scrape is out to my left, I guess. And this deer's coming in from my right. So I peek over, see it's a shooter, grab my bow. I'm at full draw. And when I see the deer, he's at like 25 yards. So he's like super close.
On you. Yeah.
Yeah, he's on us. So when I saw he was a shooter, I had my bow in I reached over, grabbed my bow, get over top of my bridge, and I'm at full draw. This deer comes in to 17 yards and stops behind 2 trees, and like there's some greenbriers and stuff there. So, I mean, 17 yards broadside, have a shot. Like, I'm looking through my peep sight, and all I can think is, oh, that's a gut shot. Like, I don't want to take that. So I'm waiting for this deer to take 2 more steps. And at this point, I can't see what he is. Like, you can't see any of his antlers. You can't see his head. You can't see his front shoulder. And you can't see his back legs. Like, all you see is basically
torso,
his midsection.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So, and Cameron has a camera. The camera's rolling now. So a minute goes by, deer doesn't move. 2 minutes goes by, deer doesn't move. And finally, I'm like, I gotta let my bow down. I let my bow down, and you the deer, it's still, like, he's still standing still. Like, he came into a point where he could see whatever made that noise, like down around that scrape area, but whatever made that noise could not see him. Like, he just came to the edge of that cover and would not take another step.
Yeah.
And he just knew, So long story short, that he didn't like something. After, I think, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, he didn't like something and kind of backed up and boogied out of there to like 25 yards and then stared back, kind of in our direction. So he didn't like whatever happened. He didn't like that he didn't see a deer, down there working that scrape, hitting that scrape. But after we looking at the footage and then looking at the trail camera pictures, the deer's is a Boone and Crockett deer.
Right.
How big he is, I don't know. He's at least 185 inches, just an absolute giant.
Yeah.
And then going back and looking at that footage again, like, the shot was better than what I thought. I thought the shot was going to be, really back in his guts, but I could have snuck one in there if I would have had my wits about me.
Was he quartering away from you a little bit, or was he quartering toward? What was like his body setup?
He was quartering to just barely. I mean, just ever so slightly. I mean, it was almost a perfect broadside shot, just about perfect. But there was a little bit of greenbriers in there, but the greenbriers were closer to him. They were almost right next to him. So as far as, like, there was a shot there. It was just me thinking, like, not seeing that front leg and that front shoulder and not seeing his back leg. There was nothing. It's like a brown torso in between 2 trees.
Yeah, you had no context.
Like.
You had no context to, like, have a reference point of, like, where exactly you were to know. It's like, at least if you could see a little bit of back leg, you could kind of tell, where you were at in terms of, like, the length of his body and whatever. Or if you could see just at least a little bit of front shoulder, you definitely know. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
not only that, yes, no context as far as, length of body, or, like, the deer never moved until he's just back straight up. So there was, like, if he would have moved one of his legs or something, you could have seen a muscle move or some type of something in it, on his body move. There may have been some indication there exactly to his position, but it just never happened.
Right.
And as a bow hunter, you're always like, I never thought, like, that deer wasn't going to take 2 more steps. Like, you never think that. But
I know.
Long story short, yeah, I should have took the shot, didn't, and I made 3 more trips down there to hunt that deer. Never saw him on the hoof again. Did have some trail camera pictures of him during the day through November, like, between I think the last daylight pictures I had of him in that spot was November 15th or 16th.
Right.
Went down there the week before Thanksgiving or the week of Thanksgiving, and told myself, and I think you and I talked about this, I was going down there to scout to either lay eyes on him, bump him, or kill him.
Right.
And I ended up bumping a deer out of a bed, but never saw exactly what deer it was, and that was probably a quarter mile from where I had that encounter. So whether it was him or not, I have no idea. It laid out to be, it was a big bed by itself, so upper 1/3, typical buck bed.
Right.
But did not see the deer.
Well, there was a second big one that was in there too, S-bend, right?
Yes. So that's the other side of it. There was an easy 160-inch 10-pointer down there. He was probably a 170-inch 10-pointer on that camera as well in the daylight. So there was 2 deer in there, and that S-bend deer was a deer that I had been hunting in 2016 and 2017 when you and I were down there.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I stuck that camera on that bench, was to kind of spread my cameras out a little bit to figure out what was going on with him, to try to get on him. So that camera ended up leading me to this bigger deer this year.
Yeah.
So it's a long, super drawn out story, and there's a little more to it, but that's the gist. That's the basic thing. So just. And in my mind, like having an encounter with a deer that size, and I say 185 inches, I've gone through every scenario. I measured that shed and referenced the pictures as a 3-year-old. As a 3-year-old, he was between 150 and 153. And I think that deer is probably in the 90s.
Right.
I don't think he's quite 200 inches, but
he's a giant.
Just an opportunity. Yeah, an opportunity on public land or on any land on a deer like that, that could be once in a lifetime. But down there, it's like you work so hard to find a deer, to get on deer, because the numbers are so low. I've just really beat myself up about that for a couple of weeks. But I'm over it now. You had the opportunity once. You just got to do the work to get on them again. So
yep. That's just it, man.
It's no different than this. Yeah. Yep.
You just got to keep kind of grinding through. And I know you made a couple other trips, and we've talked since, about, going down and, and I know we talked a little bit, even when I was coming back from Iowa or whatever, just because, of course my failures out there were well chronicled. And so we were kind of talking and not reminiscing, but just kind of talking about missed opportunities and stuff like that. I think you and I even talked after I missed the first time out there, and it was just you just got to kind of keep trying to figure it out. It's like they don't disappear necessarily. You just got to kind of figure out where they've moved off to. And I don't know, you and I talked about, the cool thing this year was I got to take that trip. The bummer of it is that you and I have been hunting together regularly every year around that time. And so I missed that, getting to spend that time with you, hunting. And so our plan is next year is we're going to go back and, hit that beast again and get after it. And I think what we did talk about was that we were like, you know what? We know there's at least going to be 3 good deer in that general ridge system, because there's the S-bend, there's the big one you had the encounter with, and there's the other one that you found the sheds from. So we know, and for people out there listening, they might say, well, that's only 3 deer on how much space, right? But it's like, if that area, when we say there's low deer density, it's like when we hunted there in 2017, I think it was.
Yeah.
It was 2017. We hunted, 9 days straight, and I personally saw 3 deer in 9 days. So when we say low deer density, it's like that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's super typical for down there.
Yeah.
You can hunt all week and not see deer. Like I've been in that situation too. So it's a hard place to hunt, but it's super rewarding. It's super fun.
Yeah.
And it just fits my mindset and our mindset together. I think we think and hunt very similarly. And it just fits our style. So it's a lot of fun to be down there with you.
Yeah. And you got to hunt with the right guy in that spot, not just from a meshing of styles, but positive mindset, because you're going to have some tough days,
sure.
Where you're not going to see anything.
And
if you get beat up over not seeing anything, it's not because you're not a good hunter. It's because literally there's not any deer around there. That's why I was saying the frame of reference of how many deer I saw in 9 days is because when we say that we know that there's 3 good deer in that area, and this is a huge piece of public. Well, if there are 3 good deer in a general area, that is really promising for that spot, for that area.
Yeah.
Because you might not have a good deer on 1,000 acres. You know what I mean? In that that place. So I'm looking forward to that hunt, man. And it's kind of interesting because it's almost the same as the last time we went, because I'm going to be going out west to Colorado right before we go to that. So I'll come back in good shape to be able to run those mountains this year again, because that place will eat you up as far as the terrain and the mountains and ridges and stuff like that. It's not for the faint of heart, man. It's got some elevation, and it's jungle thick too. So.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah. Actually, I mean, hopefully we get down there and do some postseason stuff. This spring, late winter, early spring. and
yes,
see what
that is
it's
definitely
like,
the plan.
there's definitely some more scouting to figure that deer out. I got cameras down there, and there's a bunch of daylight stuff happening, but there's more pieces. There's more information that we need to know to get down there and kill that deer within a 5 to 7 days.
Yeah.
If you could sit down there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you could probably make it happen. But fit that into 7 days. I mean, that's whatever 5 days, 7 days, 9 days, 3 days, whatever number that is. Like there's some more stuff we need to figure out.
Yeah, and you definitely got to be prepared to do a lot of walking in that piece. That's not a joint necessarily that you just kind of go, hey, I have one stand and I'm going to sit this spot. That was kind of some of what my downfall was. I think the last time we were there was that I moved around, but I did, I knew that weren't going to see a lot of deer, and I was like, and I thought I had some decent spots, or that we had some decent spots, especially that one Scrape Ridge. I was like bound and determined to make that spot work, and it might have bit me in the ass because I got married to it a little bit, and probably screwed myself a little bit. But so anyway, with that, I think we can now move into question and answers, a little bit of Q&A from the listeners, if it tickles your fancy.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it, man. I'm going to take a little sip of my bourbon here. I'm having a little Michner's. Someone bought this for me for my birthday, I think last year or whatever, and I just wrapped up the bottle. So good old Michner's.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
give them a plug.
You want to give them a little plug? Yeah, maybe they'll want to get involved.
Wasn't that the first whiskey company founded in America? Is that am I right, or am I thinking?
I think you're right.
Else?
I got the bottle here. I'm going to look at it because I feel like I read that on the bottle somewhere. USA #1, small batch, 1753 is when it was established. It says USA number. I think it says USA #1 because it was maybe the first one. Pre-Revolutionary War quality standard dating back to 1753. Yeah. So if it wasn't the first, it was damn near the first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think this one's from 1752. That'd probably be a little pricier than like the $40 price tag at the state store. But
yeah, get out about six zeros onto that.
Yeah, exactly. But the cool thing about this, not to get on like a whiskey and bourbon topic, but for those out there listening, it's like I don't drink a lot of bourbon anymore, but I'm a little bit of a bourbon connoisseur to a degree. And Michner's, from what I understand, is supposed to be what I'll classify as like the poor man's Pappy Van Winkle. It's supposedly very reminiscent of Pappy, but just without the exclusivity and the price tag with it. So that's why my buddy got it for me. But anyway, listener questions. I don't think they tuned in to listen to a bourbon tasting catalog here. So we'll go ahead and dive into some deer hunting. So first question that came in, this is kind of a cool one too, man. I always like this particular question, is biggest changes that we've made from last year to this year in terms of like our hunting. So, it could be a piece of gear, it could be a style, it could be, anything really, but I'll let you kind of field it first and then I'll piggyback off you. So what was the biggest changes you made from last year to this year?
My biggest change would have to be involving my gear, both my climbing system and the transition to almost solely a saddle.
Yeah.
I know that you're a huge fan of saddle hunting, mobile hunting, and I've always been mobile. And I've actually had a saddle since 2015. I had an old trophy line tree saddle, which back in the 80s, I think they were one of the first mainstream saddle companies to market towards whitetail hunters. And I think at one time, like they had a patent, some type of patent on what they were doing. I don't know the specifics of it, but I actually got rid of that because I didn't like it. And I hooked up, met Greg and Ernie over at Tethered. Actually, the introduction came from yourself, I believe.
Yep. At ATA.
And got set up with those. Sat down with those. Round table or whatever with you and a few other folks, and played with that in the off season. and knew I was going to use it. Actually, one of the late season hunts last year, I ran with it, and knew I was going to use it. But in the early season, after I had used it a few times with the climbing system that I kind of modified for myself, there was just no going back to a tree stand. The advantages that a saddle has with mobility, being able to keep the tree in between you and the deer. I think for me, that's one of the biggest advantages is being able to keep that tree between you and the deer, just for the sole purpose of movement when you're drawing your bow. It's just made me so much more confident. It's easy to get in and out. It's less noise. You're set up faster. Like I just personally, I can't find any cons with or downside with running with what I'm running. And on the stick side, I'm still using XOP sticks, but I went to a rope mod. So got rid of the cam lock buckles, went to a rope mod, and then I use a sling to bring those sticks in with me. Mm-hmm. So they're like it's an over the shoulder sling.
Yep. Where
all 4 of those sticks or 3 sticks are on my back, and I can basically take those off one at a time while I'm going up the tree, and I can get up the tree, set up, and pull my bow up in one shot.
Yep.
And on that top, and I'm not running a platform like you are, but on that top stick, I have a mod that's basically, it's like a 6-inch by 4-inch platform that bolts onto my very top stick. So just above that standoff, I actually do have a 4-inch by 6-inch platform. So I'm not really bringing anything, and those sticks are a little heavier than probably what some guys are using, mm-hmm. but it's still lighter than what I was using, with a hang and bang stand. So that would definitely be my biggest change from 18 to 19.
Yeah, man. It made me super happy to know that you were like all getting into the saddle game, because I know I was like, because you had experience with like previous gear and stuff like that. And my first experience with saddles was literally, using, the tethered stuff. You know what I mean? And so for me, it was like that was and I was like, oh, how could someone not just absolutely love this? And I know you were working with older gear previously, so you had some trepidation, which is natural from a previous experience. Mm-hmm. that was less than stellar. And so whenever we started talking and you were adopting it more and more, and I was like, that is awesome. I was like, that is sweet. Because, it is one of those things, man, where it's like, it's like one of the only pieces of gear that like I would like sing the praises of, like, and shout from the mountaintop. And regardless of like brand, of course, I love Greg and Ernie, and those guys, they're super awesome. They're, partners of the show and stuff. But it's just like, in general, like the concept, like people should check it out, because it's that changing. It'll change the way you hunt, or it can change the way you hunt that much if you let it. Because for me, switching to a saddle was less about weight and was always more about, like, I'm a small dude, so when you put a full size stand on my back, even if it's like a Lone Wolf Assault or whatever, which is what I was using previously, it's like, in comparison to like the size of my body and my torso, like that stand makes up like a large percentage of like my length. You know what I mean? And so, I'm banging into stuff as I'm walking in and stuff like that. So it was always not so much about the weight, even though I do enjoy the weight savings, but it was more for me about the bulk nature of it, to where it's like, give me a smaller profile to be able to slip through the timber to where I'm not smacking off of every branch, every twig, every piece of brush, and making noise as I'm kind of going through, which was like the biggest thing for me. And it really, my biggest change this year, and wasn't necessarily going to a saddle, but it was what the saddle allowed me to do. Because last year was really, it took me last year to kind of figure out like how I could run it, you know what I mean, and make it kind of my own. That's the cool thing about it, is everyone can kind of make it their own thing. And this year was really about utilizing it to its fullest ability and allowing me to hunt the way I wanted to hunt, which was super mobile and aggressive. And that was probably the biggest change for me, is that I've kind of over the years become more and more aggressive, and I've talked about it, and I've kind of talked myself into it to give myself the confidence to go do it. And this was the first year where I really fully adopted and embraced that mobile, aggressive, and didn't look at some of the things in the past that I would look at as a negative, like bumping a deer or whatever. Like, I didn't see that as something that was a terrible thing. It was me learning where the deer were at, and then now I know where to hunt them. And so it was more so taking that type of approach this year, which was the biggest change for me. And then, on the gear side of things, I made some addition. I'm always fiddling with my gear. So it's like this year I went from, last year using full length sticks to this year I cut them down to 17 inches and a 5-step rock climbinator, and with 2 sticks I can set my platform high. I can basically get about 16 feet with that setup, 15, 16 feet. And for me, a lot of times that's enough where I'm hunting because I'm, as Chad, like in swamps, it's like you get cover pretty low, especially during the early season and get into rut. Like I might have to climb a little higher. But out in Iowa, I didn't really need to climb any higher than that just because there's not pressure. So deer don't really look up in trees. Pennsylvania's a different story. I got to get a little higher because deer do know to look up trees. So you do have to get a little bit more height. So in that case, I will take a 3rd stick with me. And with that, it's like I'm able to get up to 20 feet, if not a little bit higher. So those are probably the biggest changes that I've made this year. And then move into a back tension release, which was, something I did throughout the year. So anything else for you, man, on the biggest changes for you? Anything to add, or we want to move on to the next jammer?
One thing I would like to point out about that you mentioned making that saddle your own.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the one thing I would like to just mention about the tethered mantis is that it's It's built to be modular. So there's all kinds of micro fit adjustments, molly straps around the back to where you could add dump pouches or cis haulers or yes, the saddle itself it's a phenomenal product. It's way better than what I was using, that dated product that I was using back in 2014, 2015. But the ability to make it your own to fit how you want to hunt with it is, I think, one of the bigger advantages that it has over other products available on a marketplace currently. Yeah. Like I think, especially with like the guys that are mobile hunting, the DIY guys, I feel like those guys like to tinker. Like we all like to tinker with our gear.
Yep.
And I think that's just another advantage. About the tethered product.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was responding to a post on Facebook to the Saddle Hunter forum, and because someone was asking, they were new to saddle hunting, and they were asking like, how do you get your platform up and down the tree if you have a Predator platform? And not so much going up because I'll use a Predator pack that I have paracord loops that are on my shoulder straps of my. I use a Sitka Fanatic pack, and so I have paracord loops on my shoulder straps. And then I basically take the hooks that come with your saddle, and I put those, basically at the ends of my Predator pack. Where I took the arm loops off of the Predator pack, and I basically clipped those hooks in there, and I just hooked them onto the paracord that are already on my backpack shoulder straps. And then that's how I carry it in. I go up the tree that way. I pull it off my back. I set it up, and then when I come down, I literally. That's the cool thing about saddle hunting is like everything has a purpose. Like I don't carry anything in with me that's not dual, like multiple use, right? So when I walk in with my assist strap, that is literally what I use as my stick caddy because I carry my sticks over my shoulder just like you. But it's like that assist strap allows me to be public land legal to where I wrap that around the tree, and that's what I hang all my gear off of with some pro clips. And then whenever I go to climb the tree, I literally have paracord on my saddle loops on the side to where I hang my sticks off. One off each hip if I'm carrying 3. If it's just 2, I set the first one, and one's on my left hip, and I go up, hang my platform. When I go to come down, I actually have a hook, like another carabiner with a piece of paracord on my cis strap that actually loops over a standoff of my sticks. That's how it loops around it, right? One end I girth hitch it around the standoff. The other end I use that piece of paracord on like a small carabiner. Well, when I get to the top and I go to put that cis strap around the tree, I take that carabiner off. I have a piece of paracord loop that's on the back of my saddle through a molly loop, and I just clip that carabiner to that loop. And then whenever I go to pull my saddle, or when I go to pull my platform off, I have a piece of small paracord loop at the end of my platform. So whenever I pull it off, I just take that and clip that to the carabiner that's hanging off my ass, and that's how I come down. Mm-hmm. So it's like,
yep,
metal never touches metal. Everything is built for a purpose. Everything has dual uses. Like, so I'm not carrying extra stuff in. I try to figure out how I can take, if I need this one thing, how can I make it do more than one thing so I don't have to carry an extra thing? And that, to me, I think is the beauty of those systems. So,
yep, for sure.
Cool. All right. So enough of that rant, because wax poetically for hours about saddle hunting because I'm a nerd about it. But the next question is car hood scrapes or rub lines. And I'll let you take this one first since you're the guest.
Well, that's pretty broad, and it depends on the context of the sign.
Yeah.
It could be either or. For me, it depends on what time of the year, how fresh that sign is. But all of that sign needs to relate to bedding, and I'm not saying anything that no one else has ever said. Dan he's a godfather of these concepts and relating the sign back to bedding. But if I can find a car hood scrape, if it's a primary scrape in relation to bedding or security cover, where I hunt, that would be a spot that I would hold priority over rub lines.
Yeah.
For me, I do pay attention to rubs, and if there is defined, if I can couple those rubs with like trail camera data and I can define that movement to a specific area or to a bedding location, absolutely I'll hunt it. But without knowing what deer made that rub, it's hard for me to hunt that sign. Because most of the time I can couple that scrape. If I see a scrape like that, I'm going to have a camera on. That's just the nature. But I don't always hang cameras watching rubs. And to me, there's a couple things when I start looking at rubs, and Greg's like, Litzinger's like the king of rubs and the details. And I pay more attention personally to the height. And if the rub is on a smaller tree with like bushes or anything around that tree, then I want to see that other stuff, that's maybe a foot away or 6-8 inches away from the main rub. Like I want to see sign on that as well, because even though I see a rub and I see that it's maybe thigh high or waist high, like that still could be from a 2-year-old deer. And like it's for me, and I'm not the greatest at reading that stuff. To be totally honest, if I know there's a good deer in the area, yes, I pay attention to that, and then, I try to relate it back to bedding and couple it with a camera. But for me, like, I don't know, in the area that we hunt, on that public, the deer density is like we talked about earlier. It's super, super low. It's very easy to monitor those scrapes with cameras, and that's where we see the most daylight activity if those scrapes are related to bedding or security cover. Now, if you get those scrapes down in the bottom, or up sometimes on the very top of a ridge, like most of that stuff's happening at night. But if you can get down, on a bench that's on a leeward side, or sometimes they're not even on leeward sides, but if you can relate it to security cover, then that's where I'm going. I'm going to the scrape.
Yeah. No, I think you and I mean, we're good buddies, and we hunt very similarly, and we have a lot of the same guys that we pick their brains, whether it's Litzinger, Infalt, or Eberhard, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like those are the guys that I think that we've leaned on in the past to kind of, validate some of the things that we're seeing or learn some new tricks. And I'm kind of the same way. It's like being honest. It's like I do like rubs. I guess I probably prefer rubs earlier in the year would be probably, I think, my kind of perspective. But I will always prioritize a scrape over a rub most times, and that's probably just more recently. The only reason being is because I've really only ever had a rub line work out for me one time, where it's like a rub line to me is if I know where that bed is, and I know and I obviously found the rub line, then that to me is like the roadmap to go kill that deer. And I've only ever had that happen one time, and it was on a private piece. It was a couple years ago, where it's like I thought I knew there was a deer bedded on this point. I found the bed, his rub line popped up, and I ended up jumping him out of that bed. I ended up pushing the envelope too close to the bed and screwed myself and watched him jump out of the bed. And then actually he came back to it, and another guy went in and turkey hunted that ridge and bumped him off of it, and then he was one of the neighbors after that. But that was the only time I've ever had a rub line really kind of work out for me. But I've recently, probably in the past 2 years, and especially this year, scrapes have just been magic for me. I don't know that I've set up on a primary scrape area this year that I didn't have, bucks visit while I was there, or at least pass by while I was there. Now that being said, I think to your point, all scrapes aren't created equal necessarily. I'm definitely looking for it, like you said, that's in that, a primary scrape area with a couple scrapes around it. It's got to be next to side cover, transition cover at minimum, or, outside of a bedding area. And that's kind of what I'm going to prioritize. Now, the holy grail for me is kind of what I've run into a couple of times in Iowa, which was I found a primary scrape area with hammer rubs in it. That was like, like a red arrow pointing down going like, hey, stupid, you should sit here. You know what I mean? That's the holy grail, of course, is if you can get that, and I agree with you, man. It's like rubs are one of those things that I have a hard time interpreting. Again, like I've talked to Greg about it because he's really, really good at it. It was easy while I was in Iowa to interpret it because it's kind of hard to walk by a rub that's chest high. You know what I mean? It's like, duh, big deer made that. You know what I mean?
Right.
But, when you're not hunting an area that, that there's necessarily that caliber of deer that often, right? And you're hunting like PA or some of the places in Ohio, and Ohio has plenty of good deer. But you're not necessarily running across that caliber of sign that often, or there isn't like the huge disparity between like, oh, that's a decent deer and it looks like a really good Pennsylvania rub. And then when you see a true Iowa rub, you're like, oh shit, like, okay, different game, So I think that's my 2 cents, man. It's like always the scrape. If I had like in a vacuum, I'm hunting a scrape. And unless, unless it's early season, and I have a definitive rub line and I've done my homework and I know there's a bed close to that rub line, then I might hunt the rub line. So yep. I think with that, is there anything else? It was very, we could have also answered that by saying, see any podcast John Eberhart has done and talked about scrapes.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many guys that talk about, different tactics, and everyone kind of has their own way of looking at things and their own system that works. But I think when you start to listen to everyone's take on sign, like everyone that's getting it done, it's always related back to either security cover or bedding. And that's, if you can relate the sign to that, bedding in the close proximity, like 100, 150 yards, then you should probably hunt it. And then whether that's a rub or a scrape, I think that's the baseline there.
Yep. Totally agree. All right, on to the next question. It's this one is saddle related yet again. So this person's asking, this actually might be a good one for you because I think I've touched on this maybe in the past a little bit, and it might be good just to come from you, given that this is your first year in the saddle full time. But when saddle hunting, how bad is the back strain not having something to lean back on?
It's not bad at all. That was one of the things that I had some issues with back in 2014, 2015 with that older saddle. And a lot of it was my own fault. It was running my tether too high or too low, not at the right height. And also the saddle just didn't fit me. So the saddle that I had bought was used because the company that I bought it, they stopped making them. They I think in 2014, I don't think anybody was making saddles. At least mainstream. So I had bought that thing on eBay, and it didn't really fit all that well. And then the height that I was running my tether was probably, and it is a learning curve. And there's a ton of information out there on saddlehunter.com, and Greg and Ernie are they're doing. I think that's why Tethered is the premium brand in that space, is because they do such a good job of educating people on saddle hunting, regardless of what you're running. Like, they just want people to hunt with saddles. They don't yes, they want you to buy their product, but that's not the end all be all for them. So,
right.
Just a quick note on that. But on these all day sits, what I will say is it does pay to have a bigger platform than what I'm running, because you're able just to move and shift, make little adjustments with your feet, your hips, and just kind of transfer the weight around a little bit. It's a lot like a stand. Like if you sit or stand in a hang on stand, regardless of what it is, like there's going to be a point where you need to adjust and move because it's going to be uncomfortable if you're there all day.
Yeah.
And hunting with a saddle is not any different.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, and you're gonna have to help me out here, but the back band that Tethered has, what's that called?
Back band. It's the recliner.
Yeah, the recliner. There you go. So I was set up with one of those. Greg had sent me one of those with that original that Manus that I had, but I didn't use it until after my first or second all day sit. I always carried it with me, but I never really messed with it because it's something like, again, I didn't have back in 2014, 2015, and didn't have any experience with it. But using that actually took the comfort level probably to the next level, to where, I mean, I can hang in that, and I am probably even more comfortable than I am with a stand, because you don't have, like, you're sitting in a stand when you sit, at least for me, and this is probably different for different folks, but I don't get the pressure points from sitting or in a saddle. I don't get the pressure points in a saddle that I would when I'm sitting in a stand. Like, you're sitting in a stand for whatever reason, like sometimes your butt goes numb, sometimes your feet fall asleep because that pressure is on your hamstrings, like cutting the circulation off. Like, I just don't get any of that with a saddle. And, it is, if you, like I said, if you're there all day, your back will have a little bit of strain. But I think some of that too is like the fitness level or the shape that you're in as a hunter. If it definitely takes, like shooting your bow is different. Like, you're definitely drawing larger muscle contractions from your core. So it does pay to have a strong core if you're going to be a saddle hunter. Yeah. That's one thing I would say. Like, get yourself in decent shape. But the back strain, that's a non-issue for me. Yeah, complete non-issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on all the points that I would make. I think the recliner, it makes a big difference. For me, it's like I'm the same as you. I carried it every hunt this year. I think I've used it twice the entire year. Just I don't usually get into a situation where I feel like I really need it necessarily. I think you're right with a platform. It does make a difference, right? You have the opportunity to kind of move in different positions to kind of alleviate pressure one way or the other if you're getting a little bit uncomfortable. And I think the biggest point you make is that it is no less comfortable than a tree stand is. It's just different, And so, I've been plenty uncomfortable in tree stands in my life, and I won't say that I've been any less comfortable in a saddle. The only caveat I would make is, like, if you're hunting in one of those like Summit Viper climber jammers that's like a recliner in a tree, it's hard to beat those things. You know what I mean? If you're looking for that level of comfort, saddle hunting might not be for you, right? But if you're looking to be mobile and be able to kill deer and move to kill deer and move when you need to move and not be bulky and less weight and stuff like that, and you're comfortable being in a tree stand, then you would be able to manage a saddle just fine. I think there is a little bit of a learning curve. I think you're right. Being in better shape is definitely going to help because you are using your core more. But it's not like you got to be an Olympic athlete to use it either. So there's plenty of guys that I know that are using them that aren't a model of fitness, and they're doing just fine. So, I think as far as comfort goes, it's no different than any other method that you would use to hunt from an elevated position. So if that's a concern anyone out there has, I would go ahead and brush it by the wayside and check it out. But I think we covered that one plenty good. I think we can move on to the next question. All right, so we're moving on to the next question. This next one is actually appropriate here, considering we are in the throes of what I will call late season. This person is asking, late season public land, where are you setting up with deer having been pressured all season? So do you want to take this one first, or you want me to take a stab at it first? I've been putting you on the spot with the first answer the past couple.
Yeah, let's go for it. We'll let you tackle this one first. I've have yet to find late season success. So this could be a question that might help me out a little bit.
Right. All right. So late season public land success. So I think the common knowledge is like during late season you want to find the food, right? I think the challenge is that, a lot of times when you see, major media outlets and they're talking about late season, they're prioritizing those primary food sources. And a lot of times they're referring to ag, whether it's corn, beans, food plots with brassicas in it, turnips, whatever the case is, right? And yes, all those will work. So, I think I would start by first is if you hunt public land that is adjacent to agriculture or farmland that has some type of, cut bean field, or even better if they didn't cut like a piece of them or something like that, or corn that had been recently picked or whatever, like, yes, those are gold mines. But when you start to get into the timber, and this is actually something I was just reading the other day, so it was kind of appropriate that this came in, because it's one of those things for me too, as you mentioned, Chad, that like, late season, I've had some decent encounters, but I've also had the ability at those times that I was able to set up off of, agriculture as well. And so I started thinking about exactly this as like, hunting public where you don't have, those primary food sources. Like, what am I focusing on? I mean, I think the common kind of knowledge to think about and focus on is, was there a really heavy, white oak, acorn drop on a piece that you're hunting in that particular year? Because if there is, and there's residual left over, like, I would be hunting those like immediately until they're eaten up, because that is going to probably be one of the things they're going to hammer, right? I think that beyond that, it's like they'll then often move off of those and then into like red oak, acorns, because they have, more tannins in them. They're a little bit more bitter. And so they will usually eat all the white oaks first and then move on to the other acorns after that. I think the other thing too is like when you're talking about public and you're talking about pressured deer, like we're really talking about like hunting them in the cover. Like, you're really not hunting them in open spaces any longer, because during the early part of the season or even during the rut, they'll make some mistakes and maybe come out into the open. Late season, they're not being driven by the wrong head at that point, so they're back to like surviving at that point. And so they're going to make probably, I think some would argue they'll still make mistakes because they're just at a point where they're trying to survive, so they're making mistakes to get food. I don't buy that as much necessarily, at least in Pennsylvania. They're pretty wiry this time of year. And so the one thing I started thinking about was just like, we often forget how much food is in that cover. And to a deer, when they're trying to survive, it's like they're not going like, hey, I'd really like to hit that, that little cache of white oak, or white oak acorns that's over there. It's like they're going, hell no, man. I've just been shot at for how many months? I'm going to go ahead and stay here in the cover. I'm going to eat some browse, and I'm also going to eat these, where the stump is that just got logged, in here, an elm tree that just got cut, and there's a bunch of sprouts coming up off that stump. Like, that's great food for them, right? Because I think the one thing that we don't remember, and this is something I have a hard time remembering, is that when a deer goes in, and I actually learned this from the guys from MSU Deer Lab. I think it was MSU Deer, or them or Don Higgins, but basically whenever like a deer's metabolism as it goes through the year actually slows. And so when it gets to late season, that old adage of like deer have to eat, they got to put the weight back on after rut. There is some truth to that, but Mother Nature's, a smart beast, because she, deer's metabolism slows as it goes through the fall, preparing itself, knowing that it's going to be run down, and also knowing that they're going to have a shortage of food whenever their body is probably most in need, and they're going to be the shortest on food. So their body isn't driving them as hard to hit that food at all times. So in saying that, like, primary food sources aren't the driving force behind them across the board each day equally. It's really about timing your sits, if you are going to have a significant primary food source, around the shittiest weather days you can possibly get, because the weather will drive them to food more so than just their desire to go eat. They'll still have to eat during the day. Yes, they'll get up from their bed and they'll eat in their browse. And that's why I would probably prioritize, being in high stem count bullshit, because they're going to be able to find food in there, right? They're going to be able to get browse in there and sustain themselves. If you're talking about finding like a destination food source where it's like they want to get, I'll just say get fat, for lack of a better way to say it, because there's a front coming in. There's going to be 3 days of like hunkering down, on the backside of a ridge in like a pine thicket somewhere, you know what I mean, to stay out of the wind and out of the snow. Then that's whenever I would prioritize sitting that primary food source, because the weather will drive the deer, not necessarily their desire to eat. And that's something I learned from Don Higgins, because he said watching, his farms, he was like, you get into that weather and, it's late season, you're expecting deer just to be piling into the field. And he's like, it just never happens. He's like, You give me a day where it's, -10 and driving sleet, driving snow with a 20-mile-per-hour wind. He's like, and there will be every deer in the woods will be in that field, will be in that food source.
Right.
And he was like, and that's how he hunts late season. And if you're ever just driving around during that time of year, just pay attention to like when the weather flips to crap, watch the fields, and then watch the fields every other day. And you'll see that the bigger jump happens during that really, really bad weather day. It's kind of counterintuitive because we always talk about early season or earlier part of the season or even in rut, like hunting like the front side of a front or the back side of a front. Most people want to hunt like the second day after a front. You know what I mean? Like that's usually like that prime window, like the day after or the second day after a front. But it seems like in late season, it's literally the front is what you want to hunt. You want to hunt the crap weather of it, So that would be my kind of take on, how. I'll put it this way. That's how I'm approaching it this year. I don't have any big primary food sources. Right. I'm going to be looking for leftover oaks or leftover acorns from oak drops this year. And then aside from that, I'm going to try to nestle up as close as I possibly can to bedding cover that's just shitty thick that has a bunch of browse in there for them. And that's my plan.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great answer. Super, super thorough, very scientific, because there's a lot of factual stuff that you just spit out there. I think the commercialization of whitetail hunting that we all see, whether it's on social media or TV, like late season hunting, the first thought in everyone's mind is like you're sitting in some type of blind over this giant manicured food plot and deer are just pouring into it. And for most people, it just does not happen that way.
Yeah.
And depending on the type of public that you're hunting, it like your strategies should be differing a little bit. Like if you're in the big woods, you should be focused on those super high stem count areas. And like, a lot of guys think, deer are looking for not only thermal cover, but they want direct sunlight. Well, if that wind is ripping 20 miles an hour, like they're not going to expose themselves to a southeast facing slope if there's not super high stem count there where they have that thermal cover and barrier from the wind. And just like you mentioned, conifers, like typically there's, if it's like a monoculture of conifers, yes, they'll go in there and bed. But I personally don't think deer want to pour in there because there's the browse level in an area like that usually is pretty low.
Yeah.
Yes, they will, chew on cedars and branches and whatnot, but I tend to, my personal strategy in, this is hill country, big woods, is find super high stem count areas that have thermal protection, thermal cover, and that offer the browse that you've been, that you talked about.
Yep. From
there, like I'm disregarding all the sign that's on the ground at this point. So I'm not paying attention to rubs. I'm not really paying attention to scrapes. If I see sign, if it catches my eye, it's going to be one, either a fresh track or fresh scat.
Right.
Related to that thermal cover, because that's probably where those deer are probably going to be bedding. And then as far as food sources, you mentioned the difference between white oaks and red oaks and the acid levels. Those red oaks are less desirable in the early season because the acid levels are so much higher, and that doesn't get broken down until those acorns are exposed to moisture.
Mm-hmm.
But to get super specific, I'm looking for chinkapin oaks. And that's something that I learned from a forester a couple years ago when we were actually looking for a deer that a friend of mine had shot. We'd crossed this, came up this one point, and it was loaded up with chinkapins. And chinkapin is a red oak that has, I call it a dirty tree because it just it has it's really ugly. It has a lot of branches that kind of they kind of come down to the ground, and it's a red oak, so it has pointed leaves, small acorns, and that's something like when he said that, like, this is a great late season spot because these chinkapins or pin oaks, they hold their acorns longer, so they actually drop later in the year. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's something to do with like the photosynthesis process or the photo period of the day and how it the tree retains energy. I'm not sure.
If I'm not mistaken, I think red oaks drop every 18 months. So they may be holding on just by like I think it's red oaks that drop every 18 months. And so they may just be holding on later based on their cycle of when they became mature and started producing, possibly.
possible. I have, that's something I personally want to learn more of this year, is that, subspecies identification, and then, how that relates to deer. And it's something I need to get better at. But yeah, late season, high stem count, high thermal cover stuff, with scat or fresh tracks. And then, personally, I'm looking for those chink of pins, because most of the time, like through September, October, even the first week of November, those white oaks are usually getting hammered. I mean, they're just those sawtooth oaks, English oaks, like that's where all the sign's been laid down. And then we start to see that stuff shift a little bit towards those, towards the clear cuts, and those types of areas. So that's basically what I'm doing. Very similar to what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. I think the one thing, and I think, we both kind of touched on it in different ways, is, the guys that I know who are really good at hunting late season, they know, not only can they read sign and they know how to, find the right habitat and all that kind of stuff, but they actually know like all the different species of browse that will be in an area, right? Like they can go see it while they're walking through in the fall, or when they're scouting in the spring or whatever, and know that this has X, Y, and Z in it, and this will be a great late season spot, right? And so that's when it becomes like you got to become a little bit of a biologist, because you have, like, if you can start to understand like the species of browse that you have in different places, then you understand like the food quality that are in those places, and that's paramount during that time, this this specific time of year, because that's what's the driving force. It's that high stem count, and do I have food there? And I agree with you about the conifers, where it's like great thermal cover, but like if you ever walk through like a really heavy or a dense like pine thicket or whatever, as long as like it's high enough for you to walk through, it's like there's shit on the ground to eat. There's nothing.
Right.
The only thing you'll ever find in there is some beds and maybe some fresh scat. That is the only time I've seen it that I would hunt it, is that whenever it is directly adjacent to the edge of a high stem count, kind of like nasty, briery bullshit area. Like that would probably be the only time I would hunt that, because you're almost kind of at the same time kind of hunting the edge of that, and deer still like to move along edges no matter what time of year. But then you're kind of prioritizing two things. Like you've got that really good thermal cover, which they might be retreating to bed, and then they can walk 30 yards and be lost in, a briery mess with a bunch of really good browse, and then 30 yards back, and then they're back in their thermal cover and safe. So
Right.
But how often do you get like the golden goose where you have like the best of both worlds? Not very often, but
Yeah. The only other thing I would add to that is just, and this is something that I'm doing more this year than I've probably ever have in the past, but paying attention to those wind speeds, the drop in wind speeds from day to day. I know that you mentioned inclement weather, and that's a big part of it. But specifically, I'm looking, and that's something I'll always have looked at, is the fronts and the inclement weather. But this year, like just running these cell cameras, I think that I'm starting to notice a trend, but it's a little bit too early. But just paying attention to like those high wind speed days where it's, double digits, 12, 15, 18 miles an hour. And then that drop, the following day down to, 6, 7 single digits basically.
Right.
So that's something I'm trying to pay a little more attention to. But I would say wind direction, and your wind direction should always, kind of indicate your access and where you should start to scouting, or at least start a reference point to start scouting, especially if you're in hill country. But, that's, maybe you're in an area like this area that we're in, is the winds are typically out of the west, and that usually doesn't change. But I know there's some cases that through the season, that primary wind might come from the southwest, and then later in the year it might be coming from the northwest. So just keep that stuff, in mind, where you're, just to give you a reference point or point to start.
Yeah.
When you're scouting that public land.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's like, understanding, I think no matter what time of year, what season, it's like understanding what your prevailing winds are, dominant winds are during the course of your year. Like this year, I screwed myself because I had a bunch of setups for a south or a west, south, southwest, west, southwest wind. No matter if it was coming west or from the south in one way, shape, or form. That was mainly how I prioritized my setups this year, because that's usually what we get around here. Like when I went back and looked at, historical wind data, like that's the prevailing wind for that time of year during hunting season. And this year I had more north than I ever remember having in a hunting season, like ever. It's just like it seemed like every good weather day had like a north wind with it, and it was just like I would have like a spot I could hunt,
Right.
which was kind of shitty. But all right, on to the next question. So this one is related to late season as well. I thought this was kind of an interesting question because I have a little bit of a take on this, not necessarily a take on it, but I guess maybe news, if you will. So it says late season archery from the ground, crazy or could it work? So do you want us to take a stab or do you want me to take a stab?
No, I'll take a stab at it.
Right.
No, I don't think it's crazy. I don't hunt a ton from the ground, really at all. But it's more because just personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, like the hunting public guys, they are killing a ton of deer on the ground. Cameron, our content director at Exodus, killed deer off the ground late November. I 100% think like that should be something that people are thinking about. I don't think you should shoebox yourself into always, being elevated because there are times where you can get away with being on the ground. I think that if you do want to hunt from the ground, you really got to pay attention to your wind.
Mm-hmm.
You really got to pay attention to the thermals. And personally, I would say, and again, this is something I haven't done a whole lot of, but those high wind speed days that I just talked about, those are days where I think that you probably could get away with hunting on the ground versus, being on a stand and actually getting in within bow range. But you got to go slow. You got to use the wind for cover, and just be super, super cautious. And you almost, still hunting is really a lost art.
Mm-hmm.
When you're carrying a gun, firearm, or maybe late season muzzleloader, I think that obviously your odds go way up to being, still hunting on the ground. With a bow, it's gonna be tough. I mean, there's no way around it. But I don't think it's crazy. I do think you could do it. But I would prioritize those either days where it's you have high wind speeds, where the woods is pretty noisy, where you can get away with stepping on crunchy leaves because it's going to be cold for the most part. So stepping on the ground, you're going to make some noise.
Yeah.
But I would prioritize those high wind speed days, or even days where maybe there's some snow on the ground where you can cut tracks, possibly backtrack deer, cut a track while you're on Onyx and looking at those bedding opportunities and thinking, okay, these tracks, I just cut this track, they're going in this direction. It lays out to these bedding opportunities that I'm seeing on Onyx, whether that's on a topographical map or just a satellite image. And just know that, most of the time these mature deer, they're bedding in an area because it's bulletproof. They're either going to see you coming or smell you coming. If you could be on those high wind speed days where it's really noisy, you can take their hearing away, but you almost have to have the approach where you're coming in from the side. You don't want to, obviously you definitely don't want to be down or upwind of them. But I don't think that you want to come head on with the wind blowing directly in your face, because I think most of the time those deer are probably going to be bedded where that's their visual advantage. So they're looking in that direction. So you got to come from the side and use those days where the woods is pretty noisy.
Yeah. So I agree with everything you said, and I actually experienced that last point that you just made, which was, I was still hunting and hiking my way through that CRP field in Iowa, and I was stopped at this draw and was glassing the other side of the CRP field and the other side of the draw. I had the wind in my face, so I felt good because I was still hunting my way through, but I was really trying to get to this timber line that was over across like two sets of CRP fields, right? And so when I saw this draw, I thought that was a really good opportunity for a buck to bed in. I was like, that draw is kind of brushy. It's kind of like I literally had just watched like a hunting public video like 2 days before I left for Iowa or whatever, and they were hunting like almost the exact type of that same setup, right? And so I thought of that as I was walking up on it. I was like, you know what? I'm going to glass this real quick. Glassed it and didn't see anything, so I ended up moving in. I glassed it for like 5-10 minutes and ended up moving. And then as soon as I started moving, I jumped, a Booner crockett deer. And he was set up exactly like you said. Like I had the wind in my face, but he was set up to be looking in that direction to where he wasn't going to give up he had his wind to his back, so he knew anything that was coming from that direction. And he was looking in my direction while I had the wind in my face, so he was covered there. The only way I would have been able to sneak up on him would have been doing exactly what you're saying, which is I almost have to act like the deer now and kind of side angle my way in to get, to basically keep my, well, I shouldn't say I'm acting like the deer. It's almost like you have to be in a movable tree. You have to think about where he's set up and how you would want him to approach you, and you need to approach him that way, Mm-hmm. And so I think that point was really, really valid. But I do think you can get it done on the ground, and I think it's all the stuff that you had said. I think prioritizing those windy days for cover, also wet days, right? Like to where the ground's wet and the leaves are wet, and you can be quiet on your way through. I think the other thing, at least in PA, because of the amount of pressure that we get, is like you need to have a pretty bulletproof, brushed in type of setup, or you got to be rocking a ghillie suit. Like I don't know that you can get it done if you're just kind of somewhat out in the open, kind of trying to park up against a tree or a piece of brush. I feel like you're going to have to get pretty well immersed in the surroundings to get an opportunity with a bow. At least that would be my opinion. And to that point, I did one ground hunt while I was in Iowa, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And I grew up hunting that way. Like that's how my dad taught me to hunt. Was my dad always still hunted. Like I never got into like a stand or an elevated setup until I was in my 30s. And so I never had a tree stand or anything growing up. And so it was really cool to kind of get back to that and hunt from the ground again. And so this year, that's kind of like every year I try to pick something that I want to like throw into my arsenal. And it just kind of goes back to what we were talking about with like the saddle stuff. It's like, because I'm not carrying a tree stand, it's like I can throw a ghillie suit jacket on now with a saddle, put my platform on my back, and just start walking, and I can hunt whatever setup is going to give me the best opportunity. I don't have to, say I got to get into this tree because, well, I got this 20-pound stand on my back. I got to hang it somewhere, because I can literally just toss it down on the ground next to me in a ghillie suit and plop down, and then if nothing happens, I can move a mile, 2 miles, find sign, get into a tree, and you're good to go. So. That's the one thing I'm definitely throwing in my arsenal for next year is a ghillie suit for those ground opportunities, because there was a few setups in Iowa that I would have liked to have possibly explored a little bit more. There just wasn't quite enough cover for me to not have a ghillie suit and be comfortable in it. You and I always talk about, man, confidence is king in the whitetail woods when you're hunting, especially with a bow. And without with some type of ghillie suit breaking up my shape, I didn't have confidence that the setup was going to work. Probably a different story if I had the right gear with me that day, but I didn't. So yeah, man, that's my thoughts on it. I think it'll work. I think you just got to be very prescriptive about it. I don't think, you can get lucky in a tree sometimes. I think on the ground, I don't think there's much luck to be had. I think it's skill from the ground 100%. So yeah. One thing that you alluded to, but neither one of us really spelled out or clarified is if you're hunting from the ground and you're relating that sign or finding sign and trying to relate that to bedding with Onyx, like you got to have glass with you. You got to have a pair of binoculars where you're scanning and looking for bedded deer. And you don't necessarily, you don't have to kill that deer in its bed, but you got to be, obviously you got to get close enough to where that deer is going to get up and move during daylight. And it's probably not going to be very far because they have been pressured all year long. They've been shot at. They've smelled human scent. They've maybe been bumped once or twice. So, you got to get close and, not having if you don't have binoculars with you, that's probably outside of your bow. That's probably, to me, that would be the second most important thing to have if you're going to hunt off the ground is, a decent set of glass, being able to scan and look out in front of you or the direction of travel to see if something's bedded. Yeah. So and just to be clear, because I know I was in CRP whenever I was doing that, but with all the leaves off and stuff like that now, it's you can see a good ways with good glass in the timber right now to where it's even beneficial to use it while you're in the timber while you're still hunting through, just because you walk into plenty of places where it's open. I think the other good thing, going back to the late season point, is that I think you were kind of alluding to it. It's right now, man, those deer aren't going to move a lot. So if you know where they're at, if you can find them, you should be able to get on one. You know what I mean? Because they're not going to get up and just kind of they're not moving miles a day like they were during the rut or even pre-rut. I mean, we're really going back more their movement style for mature bucks at least. is going to be very reminiscent to what they're doing in early fall, late summer. To where it's going to be bed to food, and they're going to be feeding right around their bedding area. And they're going to get up and mill around there, take a leak, take a poop, lay back down. You know what I mean? Like, that's going to be their whole life. So it's like, if you've done your homework through the year and you have some prime bedding areas and they're in thick areas, I would even go back to those summer bedding areas and prioritize starting there and looking at those again. Because, especially if it's not far from like significant food, like, great place to start. All right, folks, that's a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We'd be super appreciative if you do those 2 things for us. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, Gumleaf USA Boots, Obsession Bows, Ramcat Broadheads, Trophy Taker Rests, and Dead Downwind. And until next time, we'll see y'all.